The following is intended for mature audiences only. Discretion is advised.
Thank you so much for downloading this episode of So What Do You Really Do? The podcast where I, your host, Deadair Dennis Mallard, talks to artists and entertainers, and the artist and entertainer on the podcast today is Benny Blue, or Benny Blue Eyes. He's a comedian out of LA who just filmed his very first comedy special called Live from My Mother's Funeral. And I got to tell you, Benny and I don't know each other. PR people reached out to me and they're like, hey, would you like to interview Benny for this? I'm like, no, because you're a PR person and I don't like PR people. But the person who was the PR agent that reached out to me is somebody who has brought me other guests before, and her and I have gone back and forth about other guests on the podcast and back when I worked for Dig Boston. So she's not as scummy as other PR people are. So I checked him out. I saw that we had a few mutual friends. They confirmed, dude is funny. He's a good guy. Yeah, you should have him on the podcast. He will. And I'm so glad I did. I got to get over that PR, like, oh, I hate PR people. I hate when they reach out to me. I hate it. It feels so ugh. But I have my own problems with PR people. I've talked about it before, especially the ones that are like, oh, hey, do you want to interview this person? Like, yeah, can I use the interview for my podcast? They're like, no, we want print only. And I'm like, no, it's 2024. Let's do some podcasting, okay? I got a list of podcast people that are high-profile people, which I do mention because I make a big, huge mistake in the podcast. I'm a professional who made the worst mistake that any professional can make when recording a podcast. But we'll get into that. I left it in being my authentic self. Also, I didn't feel like cutting out all of Benny's roasting of me for messing up. So I left them in. But by the way, by the time you are listening to this episode, I will be on the road. I am doing a 3-month road trip, probably more than that, actually. December to March. That's almost 4 months. I'm going on the road. I was on the road sort of kind of last year during this time because of my sabbatical from work, my off season, as it is actually called. And I spent all that time in Baltimore. This time, I am not spending it in Baltimore. I'm going to be spending it on the road and been predominantly in Los Angeles. So, and I literally just before recording this introduction, I pulled the trigger on solidifying that I'm going to make this happen because I just put a big payment down for a Airbnb out in Los Angeles. I'm going to be out there for 4 to 5 weeks, January 26th to March 2nd. I'm going to drive across country with my dog, who is named Sister, and I'm going to be doing shows on the way. And I've already reached out to people about booking those shows. And I'm going to spend December in Baltimore with my family. And then I'm going to drive from Baltimore down the East Coast to Florida, and then from Florida across down to LA, and I'll spend some time in LA, and it terrifies me. Like I had to make the purchase just so of this Airbnb. Like I spent a lot of money on this Airbnb, so I'm going through with this. This is going to happen. I spent a fair amount of money. Like I can afford it. I can afford more. I don't want to pay more, but it's a sizable chunk of money. I mean, still probably refundable at some point, but it's a big endeavor that I'm taking on. And I posted about it on social media, and I talked to a bunch of friends about it, and it makes you, if you're watching or hearing me on the podcast or on the video on YouTube, on Big Comedy Network's YouTube, you can see I'm visibly and probably even audibly uncomfortable by the thought of doing this. And I don't know when I became this fearful person. Like jumping in 20 years ago, jumping and go, yeah, let's do this. Let's plan it. You know, I'm not a willy-nilly kind of guy. I'm going to plan, but I think I start thinking about the planning and I'm like, well, I can't plan for unforeseen things like my car breaking down. I can't foresee that my car completely dying and then I need a new car while I'm stuck in the middle of bump nowhere, Oklahoma. You know? How much is it going to cost me to fix this car? How much is it going to cost me to replace the car? What if I can get into an accident, a crash, and the car's totaled? What if I get hurt and I'm in a hospital somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Arizona? What if I'm in a big city and I'm stuck and I'm hurt? What if my car gets broken into and my stuff gets stolen? You know, what do I do? I don't have to worry about that if I stay home. You know, if I'm staying home for the winter and I get in an accident, I know my hospitals. I know I can get home. I got friends here who can take care of sister if I need to. If I stay in Baltimore during that time, I have my family. But if I'm driving through the swamps of Florida on the way to a show and I run over an alligator. This is insane. I don't know when I became that guy. This is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be exciting. There's supposed to be adventure. It's an excursion for a reason. So what is it about me that makes me not want to do these things anymore? Is it experience? Is it fear? Is it shame? What if I can't book enough shows to justify this trip? It happened in Chicago. I wasn't going to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it. Why not? I booked a trip to Chicago because I said I've never been to Chicago. So I'm going to go to Chicago. I have so many guests that come on my tours that are from Chicago or from the Chicago area. And I have no real experience to talk to them about Chicago. I got a really good story about some, historic fact here and there. I don't have a real life experience. So I'm going to make one. And I did. And the point was to go out there and be a tourist, get some life experience, and do comedy. Well, the show I was booked on fell through because nobody bought tickets. The open mic I went to, my name didn't get drawn. So I didn't do a spot. I spent 3 days in Chicago. I didn't do a spot. I didn't do comedy. I didn't get on stage and tell jokes. Not for a lack of trying. But it felt like a failure. It felt like I wasted my time, and I did not waste my time. There's more to my life than doing stand-up, even though stand-up is what I love, and I'm doing so many of these things because they are adjacent to stand-up or because they're connected to it or because they're going to help further my career. But that's not the end-all be-all. I had fun. I enjoyed myself. My dog, who was named Sister, came with me. She got some good, delicious food. She got to go on a boat ride. She took on an airplane flight and did a wonderful job being a perfect little doggy on the airport, or in the airplane, and in the airport. So why did I feel like I wasted everything going out there? That's not the way life's supposed to be. So, this trip, these 3 months on the road, there's no wasting time. There is no messing up. There's no what ifs. It's only doing. So if you're in the path of my shows and you're listening to this podcast, please come out. Please be supportive. Hey, I'll let you pet sister. She loves to be petted on the head by people. She loves people. Don't walk up to her and be like, oh, she smells my dog's mate. Nope, she likes you. She hates your dog. Trust me. Well, she doesn't hate dogs. She just prefers people over dogs all the time, every time. So come laugh at my jokes. Whether you're in the Baltimore area or the Los Angeles area or anywhere in between the two cities that I'll be at. All the stuff will be on social media. I have some things booked right now. Autobar, December 14th. I'm doing a special little guest spot on this show where we're raising money for charity. It's going to be a fun, great show. You can get tickets at theautobar.com. Of course, if you follow me or Mike Quinlan, who is a friend of mine, a great comedian back in Baltimore, he's putting the whole show together. You can follow one of the two of us on social media. You'll find the links. Mike's great at putting these shows together. Autobar is a legendary punk rock club venue in Baltimore, so it means more to me to perform there than it does any other venue that I've performed at. Like I had a roommate that was like, oh, I'm playing live Boston. This is what I wanted my entire career. I'm like, you're a comedian. It shouldn't be a shock that you're performing at a club. But that's how I'm getting, for my rock club, because it's different. It's different, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to be sentimental, but I'm having it, my joy in it. So I'm excited. I did it last year. I did a show last year. I'm doing it again. Mike puts on great shows. I've done a bunch of his other shows at other venues, and I absolutely enjoy it. So please buy tickets to that December 14th, theautobar.com. Keep following me on social media at Deadair Dennis on everything, and you'll see me promoting the shows. And I got to get past that. I can't sit around and be like, oh, I'm too nervous to promote my shows. What if somebody makes fun of me for it? Don't care. Don't listen to other people. I got to get through that. I don't know what happened when I started worrying about other people, but here we are. Speaking of other people listening to the podcast, hi, welcome. If you're new to the podcast, sorry you sat through that whole rant. Hopefully you're here because you heard this is a great, interesting interview comedy show. Hopefully you're here because you're a fan of Benny Blue, who's our guest on the show. And you want to support him. If you want to support him, help by supporting all the other guests. Go to whichever outlet you listen to this podcast on and hit like, hit subscribe, leave a review. Leave an honest review if you have to. If there's something that you don't like about the show, you know what? Fuck your honesty. Keep it to yourself. You can DM it to me and you'll know that I'll read the DM and I'll cry. There is, if you want to hate on me. But no, it's commenting and reviewing the podcast goes a long way to helping it being shared in the algorithm, especially on YouTube, especially on iTunes, especially on Spotify. Those are the three big outlets. Those are the three places where if you tell people why you liked it. I mean, look, I'm trying to bring out interesting story and interesting people. And if you are here to support one of those interesting people, then help them by leaving a review on the podcast. Tell a friend about the podcast. That's what we're here for. I'm trying to help people discover some of who will be potentially their next famous or favorite entertainer. If you're right here because of some other entertainer, then go out and help them by telling people about how much you love this podcast. So what do you really do? And of course, I hope you will love this episode talking to comedian who just released his new special live from my mother's funeral. It's Benny Blue. Oh my God!
That was just for us. Yeah.
Oh! That was 7 whole minutes.
Yes.
7 whole minutes that I didn't hit the record button.
By the way, I expect you to keep that wail at the top of the show in the edit.
Oh,
I will not promote this unless you keep the scream of self-disappointment in the very beginning of this episode.
Never have I ever done that. 30 years.
You were so enthralled with my stories of former professional athletes.
No, I hit all my records. I got all my records going. And I even said to myself, do I want to record the web version of his side? Jesus God. Thank God. I'm going to throw this out. Thank God it happened to you and not one of the high-profile guests I used to get all the time. All right. You want to try and recreate this?
Do it. Tee it up.
Well, I don't even know if I'm going to tee it up the same way. I'm just going to... Well, let's honest. I just made the biggest mistake of my career, which is the biggest fear of my career is always having that conversation with somebody and forgetting to hit the record button. And I just did exactly that. And I know you can empathize with that because you also have worked in the media and podcast industry because you used to record a podcast. And I mean, all right, let's start off. Thank God my biggest mistake in the business happened right here doing a podcast with a fellow comedian and not on the radio dropping an F-bomb, which boy, has that come close in my career.
Listen, this is why you're a pro. You tied it all back together to technical mishaps and our travels in the business.
I can't wait for people to listen to the 7 minutes of silence, one-way conversation.
Wow, interesting. Gap, 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 gap. Oh, that's cool. Gap, gap. Yep. That's a kind of,
listening to me turn off a fan.
That is the quality that the So What Do You Really Do listeners have grown to love and expect here from Dennis Mahler.
Wow, thank you so much for pluralizing listener. That was
Yep. That's right. That's right. All 77 of you. You're tuning in. So it's all right. To fill the gaps of silence. I'll be filling the gap.
You've worked in. Here's the best part. I have my side, so I can just take that original good edit and move it over. All right, let's try. But no, you worked in podcasting too as a producer. Yeah. So did you ever have the situation where you had to work around the not so professional or best case scenarios yourself?
Yes, as previously stated in the 7 minutes of silence, I've had plenty of situations like that. When you interview athletes or entertainers or people like that, people who aren't really accustomed to like just the sort of like audiophileness of like producing a good podcast, you just kind of have to deal with whatever they give you. So I had plenty of instances of people who knew that they were going to be spending a discernible amount of time with us and did not necessarily prepare their environment for our conversation. It's weird when you're trying to like edit out like screaming children or like the wind from a car or just them like very clearly like doing something else. You're like, is that a blender? Like, are we inconveniencing you? Like, what is going on? So fortunately, I have enough audio and video training where I can at least make some level of magic. You know, even if it's the recording situation is not ideal with whoever having on. I know you as listeners know you work in radio and then now in podcasting, so you know that sometimes you just have to kind of roll with it and make it the best you can. So yeah, like I was fortunate enough to, even though I work with a professional athlete, I never really had to train him too much or help him too much as far as like different specs. I even like would help him get gear and that sort of thing. So that was not hard at all. But it was always just trying to figure out like, is this going to be a phoner? Is this going to be? Are they going to be able to be on camera? If they're going to be on camera, are they going to be doing it from their phone? Do they have a laptop? Do they have a real kind of setup? And it just kind of ran the gamut. And eventually, you just kind of learn, especially when you're chopping up stuff for like social clips, that like, just do your best. Nobody is going to judge you for this 2-hour conversation where not everything is pristine and out of your control. And as long as you can get some good gems out of it, that's usually what I cared about, because I was always trying to say, like, what can I clip? What can I use as like a hook for this, to promote this, all that sort of stuff. So as long as I could get those like good sound bites and at least some level of quality from the conversation, I could usually kind of manage the rest of the shenanigans or anything that would come up. So there you go.
Yeah, you're like me, where we both started, pre-pandemic, working in the industry, working at having to talk to people remotely. Whereas I started my career when it was all phone based, and the thing I said the most is, all right, caller, make sure you turn down your radio. Now in the post-COVID pandemic era, we're connecting people, and the number one thing we say is, "You're on mute. You're on mute. Still, you're on mute. It's the lower left. Yeah, there it is. You got it. There you go.
You're also not wearing pants. Sit down. Up. Sit down. Up. You're in your boxers. All right. NSFW.
And that was since we talked about it in the void of the podcast. You was the podcast producer for former Arizona Cardinals player Jeremy Bridges. How did you come across meeting Jeremy Bridges?
So we were neighbors, live here in LA, and we lived in the same building at the time. He had moved back out here from Phoenix to be closer to his kids, and I had a party at my building, and then I saw this giant behemoth of a man walking, and then he shook hands with a very close friend of mine. I was like, that's a large fellow. Haven't seen that guy in the building, and I know pretty much everybody in this building. And then we introduced ourselves. We started to chat, realized we had a lot of similar interests, and obviously my background in working in sports and more like the media PR kind of side of things, and obviously him playing. And then at the time, I had my own podcast. This is even a little bit prior to starting stand-up, and this is kind of one of those things that as most comics go, we all have our 8 million rackets of ways to try to promote ourselves. So I had him on my podcast. The episode did really well within scale. Wasn't doing Rogan numbers by all means, but I had people listening to it. And then he texted me a couple days later, and he was just like, what do you think about starting our own thing? And I was like, let's do it. And we ended up doing it for 7 years, 8 years, something like that. So it may be something that comes back, but we since moved back to the Phoenix area, but we had a pretty good run. I mean, we built up a nice little audience, and we got to talk to a bunch of really cool, former athletes and entertainers and comedians and that sort of thing. And it was always a ball doing it, because he's a very naturally funny guy. So we were able to really kind of volley and sort of ping pong, that kind of dynamic as we were talking to people or talking about different topics, not even topics just related directly to sports, society, culture, politics, that would all kind of get weaved in there. But yeah, that's kind of how we linked up, and that's kind of what the show, sort of became. So it was a good time.
Was your background podcasting just your own podcast, or because you also come from the world of PR, marketing, publicists, and that is basically a whole nother side of the podcast industry. Like there's 3 big sections of podcasting. It's comedians, it's NPR, and then it's the PR marketing world that is essentially, not you or anyone you work for, but there's a lot of PR marketing advertising companies. I kind of lump them all together that like, oh, let's just create a podcast network so we have a place to sell more ads.
Totally.
We are working somewhere in that sphere when Jeremy Bridges approached you?
No, I mean, and I'll say this, and hopefully this is something that you would agree with. I think similar to purchasing a gun, there should be a waiting period for being able to purchase podcast equipment and start a podcast. You need to know your full intentions before you're able to speak into a microphone and put it out there. So I will say that. No, my background actually wasn't working, quote unquote, in the podcast industry. My original background was in music. So I majored in music production, audio engineering. So that was why I moved out to LA, and that I worked in music for about 7 or 8 years. So I really kind of started even from high school as like a studio rat. Like I've always liked to record things and edit stuff and just all the stuff that kind of comes with that. Just very obsessed with the music business at large. So it's just kind of like those skills that sort of transferred over into podcasting. Because, it's obviously a lot of the same type of tools and techniques and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I wasn't really in the business officially. I just kind of got into it by just having my own thing and then developing this show with Jeremy. And then, we would start to get paid sponsors and kind of do and merch and kind of do the whole thing. So, yeah, it was just kind of like by osmosis, by also just kind of like recording people speaking. So that's kind of how weaved into there.
You mean to tell me the guy who's wearing currently a black hoodie and a backward hat also did tech theater in high school? Are you telling me?
Yeah, I don't look like a sound guy right now. I don't look like a jaded sound guy at your favorite punk rock venue who's now mad that you keep asking for more on your monitors. Because now I'm going to crank it and give you, as they call it in that side of the business, a brain dart, which is just a jolt of a certain frequency to piss off the lead singer. So yes, I'm happy to look like a cliche. Thank you.
Dude, I honestly recently did a couple of I also worked AV tech for a bunch of years and did sound at clubs and radio and all that stuff. And I'll tell you this, I don't work in the industry anymore. I went and did a job the other day for one of my old clients just to after this job, lose my number and forget I ever existed. I'm not coming back. This is no more. I'm done with the Godfather moment of every time I think I'm out, they're pulling me back in, right? And I'll tell you, when you don't work in the industry and you go back and you do a job, it's so much more laid back. You're like,
yeah,
I don't care.
Yeah, I needed to get out of music. I loved it, but I loved it to the point where I squeezed it. And then I choked the life out of it, and then I kind of started to resent it for a multitude of reasons. But one thing I don't miss is coordinating gigs and doing load-ins and setting up mics and dealing with all the different people, because it's you just get to a certain point. It's not even an age thing. It's just you get to a certain tolerance level where it's the juice isn't really worth the squeeze here. Now, if I were on the road with, insert juggernaut, artist where this is a real, full-time, always-on kind of gig and it becomes really serious business in that way, then, all due respect to all those people. But God bless the people who are still fighting the good fight where you're doing sound for 6 bands on a night and you gotta, everybody's using the same drum kit and you gotta, you know what I mean? It's
Are you arguing with that drummer? The 3 drummers guys, one kick, please.
Yeah, one kick.
You all have the same DW set. Let's just use one set. Yeah. Your snare is not any better than anyone else's.
Right.
All right.
It's like, and it's funny. There's always you can always find the parallels between comedy and music, and it's like, look, man, you can rock as hard as you possibly can and have the set of your life, but just like in stand-up, it's very plausible that no, it's not going to matter, and not in a bad way. It's just like, it's gonna happen. The people who were there saw it and heard it, and then it's in the ether. It's gone. It's gonna be inconsequential to your life and career. Just have fun and like keep doing the thing. But like, you just kind of realize that as you're like been in the arts for a long time, you're just kind of like, yes, we all have our preferences and things that we like to do, but Jesus, there's certain things we just have to stop being so precious about them, because it's not going to matter. And it's just like, man, like when you remove that, God, the experience, like you said, like if you can kind of paratroop in every so often, it just makes the experience so much better, because you, in a weird way, you kind of do a better job, and then you also like it. But it's like, especially music dudes, man, you know this, especially like sound guys and people playing bands, it's like, everybody's very territorial and precious about this stuff. And it's like, none of us have made it. We are not in the zeitgeist. We're all just like, we enjoy doing this, and yes, we want to have a career, but holy shit, we're like cannibalizing each other, and we have to stop doing this. And comedy is very much the same way. It's like, guys, we have to stop, like, it's weird like how people can kind of like look down on each other, and it's like, dude, we're both crabs in the same barrel. And yeah, I don't understand why we keep doing this shit to each other. Hopefully I can curse, but we can it's just, I could do a solid 20 on that, but that's how I feel.
Oh yeah. It's the pedanticness of alpha males with obsessive compulsive disorders are all thrown about together in a crappy tech situation, and then having to deal is a podcast series in its own.
Yeah. Let the record show that you did yawn in the middle of my soliloquy. But other than that, we covered that. I saw that.
Look, I'm going to
blame it on your tech troubles. You're tired. You've had enough for today. It's fine.
Hey, look, I have video editing skills. I will cut away from my camera to you when I yawn. Don't worry.
Oh man, I want the yawn in there. If you keep the tribal scream at the beginning, keep the yawn in there. I want the people to know what type of content they're getting. Keep it in there.
The things that we see in between the edits. Well, let's go back to early years, because we have now very many things in common that we have quickly talked about, both while recording and prior to recording. And that I got into radio because radio, for me as a high school kid, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, radio brought all of my favorite things together. It brought music, comedy, and tech all together. And I remember my mother saying, after I applied to my college and what I was going to do for radio, she was like, well, what else can you do with that degree? I was like, well, I can go work at a music studio. I'm already making contacts in the music industry. I can work with artist reps. I can go with touring bands and be a sound guy if I learn the other things. When I was in college, I added TV to my major, because running a camera is no different than running a spotlight. Like, there was a lot of strategic maneuvers from my career based on the things that I had interest in, because I took very seriously the phrase, the phrase, if you do it for a living, you're not working. If you do it every day, you haven't worked a day in your life, right? If you do what you love, you haven't worked a day in your life. Whatever the very cliche thing I was trying to get to is. And that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I love music. I love comedy. I love tech. I love putting these things together. I love recording with bands. And, I in the 1990s, I built a multi-track recorder with a computer and a dual cassette tape deck, and brought it to my friend's grandmother's aunt's basement to record their band and shit, and that's where my path was for radio. Like, I can do jokes and I can do music and I can do these interviews. So radio was the natural progression for me. For young, Benny pre-Blue Eye days, young Benny, what was the impetus to wanting to go to McNally Smith College of Music? Were you already a musician?
For God's sake.
Was the end goal working, for touring bands? Did you have someone in the music industry that influenced you to want to be a tech guy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that you just casually admitted that you are 60 years old, and then you at some point worked with Steve Albini. So that's cool. That was a cool 90s reference. No, I mean, I like I was saying a couple minutes ago, I always had a pretty healthy, borderline unhealthy obsession with the music business at large. I don't know why I was wired that way. I was just always very curious about it, very much like the looking on the back of the CD, looking in the liner notes, trying to do research. Obviously, a lot of this was early internet, pre-internet, that sort of thing, trying to figure that out. Influence-wise, I mean, oddly enough, it wasn't so much from like a technical standpoint. My thinking at that age was that I admired like what you might call like the producer mogul type. So like I guess like a as close of a inspiration as I can give, and even though he can be divisive depending on who you ask, it'd be someone like Rick Rubin, for example. Only because he was someone that could understand and kind of tackle multiple different genres. And I always kind of viewed myself as I always wanted to be more of like the creative producer. Whereas like there would be, of course, there's Michael Jackson, there's Thriller, but then there's also the contribution of Quincy Jones and like where that kind of came in. And I kind of had viewed myself as like, I think I would be a really good number two to an artist, where I don't need to be in the forefront, but I absolutely can have like my thumbprint on like whatever we're making. I always admire like producers that can have like signature sounds, but also know how to kind of give artists space and can tackle multiple different genres. I was always like very interested in that. How I ended up at McNally was a combination of a couple things. One, probably not having the discipline and also a nice cocktail of mild mental illness to prevent me from going to a traditional college university. I don't know that I had quite the acumen to maybe go to like a Berkeley, even though I essentially so I ended up going to McNally, and McNally was billed at the time as the Berkeley of the Midwest, which I was a bit dubious then on, and especially dubious about now, considering that they no longer exist. They freaking went bankrupt, and I talk about it in my comedy special.
Your college went out of business?
My college went out of business. As chronicled, my new special live from my mother's funeral. So you can we'll link to that if you want to hear all about that. But yeah, so that's kind of where I went. I didn't really have like a plan B. I didn't really earnestly apply to any sort of real college. I think the only other thing I probably would have done was either pursued the fine arts route. I played the viola in high school, and I had the opportunity to kind of go that way for college. I just didn't want to be a fine arts nerd and have to practice for 6 to 8 hours a day. No disrespect, high skill, a lot of respect. Just wasn't for me. I wanted to work in contemporary music. Otherwise, I probably would have had to do like a year or two at community college or something like that, because it just at that time was very gung ho and laser focused on kind of quasi getting out of where I grew up, but also like I was just of the mind of I need to go to a place, but also like what is going to be that path that leads me to the business? What is the most direct path that's going to lead me to the business? And in hindsight, I don't really regret anything, but that wasn't necessarily like, there were just obviously things I probably would have done at least a little bit differently to kind of get there. But then again, it's like, it's also just kind of one of those, sliding doors moments where it's like, what if everything did work out the way I wanted to in music? I would have never started stand-up, and I don't know that I would have been as happy as I kind of got older and really decided like kind of what I wanted out of my life. So, that was kind of like my track to McNally, and that's, kind of how I, sort of measured people that I, aspired to be, I guess, in the music industry.
And so where did working in PR come from that? Because you're a tech person, you're not the one to, you don't have the background where you're working in the front of house or artist management or in that. How does one transition? Because I'll tell you right now, my skills in radio do not transfer out of this industry. The worst part is when I started doing more podcast working, the the snubness of the NPR crowd of podcasting that would say things to me like, ew, you worked in FM radio?
Yep.
Yeah, or I literally had somebody who worked at NPR tell me this, goes, you worked in radio. That doesn't qualify you to work in podcast.
That's just
I'm
a
like,
weird thing to
bitch,
say.
we invented it.
We were the original podcast. What are you talking about? It's just one dying medium transferring to another that will eventually die. Yeah, totally. So really, and this is the theme for basically my entire life. All I've really done, especially in my professional life, is just like gathered a set of skills, not to Liam Neeson this thing, but I've gathered a set of skills, and all I do is kind of like turn that into the next sort of opportunity. So like when I first moved to LA, my first, real professional job in the business is that I worked for a music startup company, and I was essentially an A&R there. And then like most startups, I got laid off after a year and a half. I started managing artists, and then from there I realized, 100% of zero is still zero, so that's probably not great. So what can I do to actually make money? And then one of my friends, who's still a very close friend at this time, I had worked with him for one of the artists that I managed doing PR, and then I kind of asked him, like, what do you think about me starting PR? And then he brought me in to work with his company, and then I eventually started my own thing. So, like, it really was just kind of like transferring skills and kind of like evolving from kind of one thing to another, where there was a lot of connective tissue between some of the, a lot of the stuff that I did. It just kind of went from being a studio guy to like being an A&R, and that's always kind of adjacent to management, and then PR is always kind of adjacent to management, and then you just kind of like find those sort of ways to sort of like ladder into the next thing, and then eventually started, because I was doing PR, then I started kind of pursue opportunities with athletes and that sort of thing. So everything just kind of connected. Everything just kind of like connected from there. So there's no real like grand plan, or really had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of like trying to find those ways to take some of the stuff that I already used, I know I could still use, but like turn that into a new opportunity. Because I kind of knew once my feet hit the ground in LA, like it became very quick. I was like, oh, I don't really think I want to be like a studio guy. I don't think I have it in me just to like try to get a gig at some big studio out here and do that thing. So once I kind of figured that out, I was like, well, I majored in this thing, so I'm already kind of like sort of giving up on it, but I'm not giving up on music. So like, what am I gonna do? So it was just always kind of a series of like failing forward and just kind of trying to figure it out as I go along. So it's been a winding road, certainly.
Well, you're bringing up the LA thing is interesting because you talked about being from the Midwest. You grew up in Michigan. Which, by the way, since we have video today on the and if you're listening to podcasts, go to Big Comedy Network on YouTube and watch the podcast. So what do you really do? Because I'm going to ask a visual question. You're from Michigan. Show me on your hand what part of Michigan.
Bam. Wait a minute. Let's do this. And then right there, if that is favorable for
because
me.
On my scenic tours of Boston, my historic comedy scenic tours of Boston, I've been asking all my Michigan guests to show me on the hands so I can start trying to memorize where things are. So if you're on this part over away from the pinky of it, it would be, you're a little bit outside of Ann Arbor, because that's in the middle, right?
No, we gotta.
I'm still doing a terrible job at this, but I'm trying.
By the way, with your punishment is to get every town that from a comic you meet tattooed on your palm, so that way you'll never forget. Now, I'm from Muskegon, so Muskegon is right along Lake Michigan. It's basically right across. Was it latitude, longitude, latitude? Across from Milwaukee, Lake Michigan, and it's about, for reference, is about 40 minutes northwest of Grand Rapids. If you've spent any time there, just familiar with it. So yeah, definitely West Michigan. So there you go.
Yeah, I love that Michigan looks like a glove. I love the same thing with people from Italy. I point at my foot and go, show me on your foot where in Italy you're from.
Right. So, right past that callus. All right, I see. That's Rome. Got it. All right.
Oh, you live right there where the varicose veins are. Okay.
That's a river. The veins are always rivers.
That's so mio. Anyway, but you went to college in St. Paul, Minnesota. Yep. And the reason I bring this up specifically is just one of my previous guests whose episode just released, Dawn Brody, who's an amazing comedian out in LA and historian. She was talking about growing up in living in St. Paul as an actress.
Oh, wow.
And how I never really thought about how much of, for that time period that where she was living there, how much of a entertainment and TV movie hub St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities area had become during that time. Was there, after college, thoughts of staying in that St. Paul, Minnesota area, working in the entertainment industry there? Or was your path always going to be LA? Because I remember after Katrina, just before Katrina, the big, huge hub for movies and TV tech for people working crew and making movies was supposed to be New Orleans, was supposed to be Louisiana. Yeah. And Katrina wiped all of that out. And that's why Georgia was able to swoop in with their tax credits and get all that business. Was St. Paul on the list of, hey, after college, this is where I'm going to have to be, or was it always LA?
Not seriously. I had just kind of done like the 21 year old thing where it's like you get a shoddy resume together because you have no life experience and you try to send it out to studios. You have to do that sort of thing. I was in a rock band. We broke up. Wasn't really that great of a breakup, so it was kind of like, well, that's not happening anymore. And I just didn't really have any. The Twin Cities are great. I mean, they have one of the best, if not the best, music scenes in the entire country. Just a great town for the arts. Just a really cool town. Viciously cold in the winter, but if you can withstand that, it's a really cool place to be. Particularly just in the nicer months, but it's a very vibrant community there. The Twin Cities are awesome. It just kind of became clear really quickly that I was like, I mean, I could technically stay here, but it was just kind of like there's clearly just very much like a cap for like what I wanted to do. And to be honest with you, I never really like pined for LA. LA just kind of happened because when I was finishing my degree, we had programs. They'd send us out for internship semesters, and be a lot of opportunities in New York and LA. And I was actually supposed to go intern for Def Jam in New York. At the 11th hour, it fell apart, and kind of my backup option was this publishing company in Pasadena. And I was like, okay, well, I need to go somewhere. And then I ended up coming out here. I did the summer semester. I got my degree. I didn't even go back I had to mail me my degree. And then I went home for a couple weeks. I'm like, well, I'm clearly not going to be coming back here. I don't have a job lined up, but I do have enough friends that I've made over the summer where I could totally slum it and sleep on somebody's floor and pay them a few $100 a month or whatever I could scrape together at the time. And, enough of a credit card limit and a hope and a prayer. And that's how I ended up just going back to LA. And I had a couple mentors that I was working with. And that's just kind of like what kicked it off, like literally starting with really nothing and not really that many connections to speak of, and just kind of like sort of building it off from there. So I've never was like, LA's the place and I have to be out here. I really like living out here now. It's been 15 years, but man, like it just it just kind of happened because of almost like a coin flip in a sense. So yeah, that's how I just kind of made roots here, to be honest with you.
Someone who'd worked in entertainment in one arm of it in the music industry. Now you're working behind the scenes, basically as, producer, PR, management, that kind of stuff. How did and when did comedy factor itself in, which is a completely different side of the entertainment industry? Like I knew, I always wanted to be a comedian, and I held off for so long, and I regret not starting comedy earlier in my life because I always kept the thing in my head, it takes 10 years before you can even start to begin successful. So I'll work at these other disciplines and that. And I regret not starting with comedy. And that was always something I wanted to do and be in. When did that factor itself in your career path in LA?
Yeah, I mean, that started to happen probably about 7 to 8 years from like working in music. Like when I was growing up, I always aspired to be some sort of entertainer. It wasn't necessarily specific to stand up, but I always kind of knew I had it in me, in those kind of chops to do that sort of thing. But like I said, I had kind of almost like suppressed that a little bit in favor of being a producer, being kind of the behind the scenes guy, that sort of deal. And then right around 7 or 8 years, the business in music was changing. It was really shifting heavily into the Spotify playlist, and obviously like how that affects like how artists get paid, and just kind of like the culture of the business itself. And I was really kind of starting to get burned out. And to be honest with you, the biggest thing was I just found myself getting really sick of like pushing other people's delusion. I'm like, well, if we're going to be in the delusion business, why don't I just get into my own business? Like I might as well push my own delusion instead of like insert artist here. And it just kind of kind of got to that point. I was working with I was almost exclusively working with unsigned independent artists, and it's like, again, we're all in the struggle, but God bless them, they had no money, so it's not really a lucrative operation to begin with. So when you add being broke and you're pushing other people's delusion, and you kind of start to have these feelings of like, kind of like you said, like not necessarily like a regret of, for me, not necessarily a regret of like we're starting earlier per se, but just kind of got to a point where I was like, I feel like this is sort of in me, and I got to try it. And I talked to some friends about it, and then my close friend who got me into the PR side of things, he gave me the deadline of doing my first open mic by his birthday, which is in September. And I did it. Did not go great, as it is for 99%.
As most first open mics will be, yeah.
But that became the bug. And, for all aspiring comics out there, you're going to talk to plenty of veteran, jaded comics who get mad when they see just more and more new people coming in. Spoiler alert, we were all, in some form or fashion, the annoying guy who wanted to start stand-up. Hopefully it lasts shorter than others, but there's no real way to avoid being the person who's like, you're the new kid in school and you're just kind of trying to find your way around it. So, yeah, that was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And I have to kind of factor in COVID in there because I was not running off to, Jerry's Yuck Yuck room in Yuma, Arizona to do sets during the lockdown. So I essentially had like a year recess from this thing. But it's been about 8 or 9 years since that first, inclination to start doing it. And there was a bit of an overlap with music, but I eventually dropped, working in music completely, and I haven't looked back. I don't really miss the music business. I'm still a big fan of music and artists and that sort of thing, but like I don't really find myself going like, gee, I wish I could really be sending out a press release for this rock band. I'm just kind of like over it, but I'm over it in a way where I'm good with it. I'm I don't have any plaques on the wall. I don't have any awards, and it's fine. I don't have any regrets or feeling like I came up short because of how obsessed I was in music to be like out of it and really almost feel like I have no attachment to it other than just being a fan of music, which I'm completely good with. So that's kind of how I got there.
Yeah, it's okay that your interests change.
Right.
It's all right that your ambitions shift. I mean, a lot of people, we kind of also talked about that in the past couple episodes. It's kind of a recurring subject coming up where people are talking about, if you're not happy being in that industry, it's okay to walk away from it. And you don't have to feel like a failure because of it. If you shift your ambitions, or if you just decide that none of this is even for me anymore. And I've had people who quit comedy and they go, hey, my wife and kids laugh at my jokes and that's all I need now.
Right.
Maybe they're fooling themselves, but they're probably not. There's a joy and happiness. We're all trying to find happiness somehow, somewhere. And if you can find that on the stage, great. If you find that at home with your loved ones, even better.
Totally. And
my catalyst for me to finally go, I'm going to start doing stand-up, is working in radio and not feeling creatively challenged, not feeling like I'm involved in the radio station I was working at the time and was an on-air jock at. I started Twitter early, and my Twitter handle was, Dennis 1043, which was the frequency of the radio station I worked for. And then when the moment I decided to change that and become Deadair Dennis, the comedian, like Deadair Dennis was the radio name. And I dropped the 1043 and switched my Twitter handle to Deadair Dennis to signify that I'm not associated with this radio station anymore. I still work here. I'm still doing stuff. I'll still promote it, and I'll still talk about when I'm on the air. But my focus now is comedy. That is my career path. Doing stand-up, doing entertainment. I'm not leaving radio, and I worked for radio for another 15, 16, 17 years, however long when when I think about how long I've been on
I
Twitter.
know. I saw. By the way, I saw a couple of grays just boink out of your mustache as soon as you said that.
Dude, I was on Twitter when it was still text messaging only. All right, like,
Oh my god.
yeah.
Ooh.
I used to read tweets through text message, like T9. I tweeted T9. All right, I was the T9 tweeter.
What is this, like 07? I got on Twitter like 09, I think. That was super early Twitter. Oh,
yeah, I was super early Twitter. Like I'm pre iPhone Twitter. That's yeah.
Yeah, when our phones
and I
had
think
buttons, for sure.
Yeah, I've been on Twitter more years than I've had relationships last days. So like, but my geriatric Gen Xer life aside, I wanted to take my entertainment career into my own hands. And also around that same time, I just finished up managing a band as a manager, and I got tired. You're right.
Yeah.
I empathize with you when you're like, I'm tired of pushing other people's ambitions, trying to make other people's dreams come true. The reason I got into radio is because I had this delusional idea that I was going to get bands that people never heard of and bands that are not getting played on the radio, played on the radio. You want to talk about delusions, bro. Yep. I'm the king of delusions. Yep. But, and I've pushed a lot of that effort with now that same effort that I want to make spread the word of other people. I do in comedy. I do in podcasts. The podcast here is simply 100% to showcase the talents and ability of other entertainers. Right. I talk about it in the intros all the time, the call to action that every time you like this podcast or you rate it on iTunes or Spotify, or you share it with a friend, you're helping to make the dreams of the guest come true. Not my dreams. You're making the dreams of the guests that come on here. And that's what all of this is about. So I can understand where you're like, hey, I'm tired of working for others. I'm going to start working for myself. So I totally get you on that. And hopefully that is the sentence that somebody listening to the podcast needs to hear to help actualize their own dreams. And in fact, I just said actualize in a conversation with a PR marketer. Kills the punk rock player inside of me a little bit.
What is going on? Are we trying to raise funding here? Are you gonna circle back and boil the ocean and put a pin in that? What other jargon?
Let's have a fireside chat about.
Yep. No, I was gonna say, as you were saying that was very well said. I'm very curious. You've essentially said it, but I would be curious to get a little bit more of your experience in this. But a couple things that I've found out that I think are very valuable to think about for people like us who came from another kind of interest or discipline within entertainment, but maybe started to focus on something that's a bit more personal to them. Like you said, that creative challenge, even if you're not a comic, even if you move into being an actual artist or musician or actor or whatever your thing is. One thing I found out moving into stand-up is that, dude, you have to not be afraid or be ashamed to do things at your own pace. And God, I struggle with that. As a comic, you might do this too, where you doom scroll and you see your friends' faces on flyers, or you see your friends' names on comedy club lineups and do this sorts of things. And it can be very easy, I think, for a lot of comics. I think we can be naturally competitive, is that we don't feel like we're doing enough. We don't feel like we're on the scene enough or making enough connections or doing this stuff. And I've had to have a lot more empathy for myself to be like, dude, you are still working, but you're doing it in a way that's serving what you want to get out of this. And that was something that I didn't do with music, but I learned from music. So sometimes when I talk to other comics who, maybe they started comedy like a lot of quote unquote traditional greats, where they're in high school or they're in college, like you alluded to a few minutes ago, that they're starting earlier than maybe what we have started. I look at it as like, believe it or not, I've been in a lot of those same situations that you're experiencing for the first time. I know what it means to settle up. I know what green rooms are. I know what press runs are. I know all the exact same things that transfer over to comedy. The reason why you don't see me in all these places is because I know where to pick my spots to put my energy, because I want to friggin' enjoy doing this. And one of the reasons why I stopped enjoying doing music is because I felt like I had to squeeze onto all those things to make this happen, and it was completely and utterly untrue. And it was the wrong way to approach it, and eventually it just burnt me out. And I don't want to resent comedy, the business of comedy in particular, not even the creative part of it, like I began to resent the business of music. So that's one part. And the other part is, I do think, and maybe this is just more of an age thing, and you kind of alluded to it a second ago as well, I've just learned that, like, yeah, dude, there's going to be a level of, like, competition, and you just have to kind of take that as it comes and, you know, be confident in your own abilities and take the good opportunities as you can get them. But also, I'm trying to get out of the habit, especially when I'm feeling myself become a little bitter or a little jaded or a little cynical. I'm trying to lean into more of being just a good support for my friends in comedy. Sometimes I feel like I'm not, like, showing up enough for them or, like, you know, sharing their stuff on social media and whatnot. And I'm making it kind of my own personal mission to be like, hey, dude, like, celebrate your friends. Your friends got a big show coming up. Your friends filming their first special, that sort of thing. I personally get in the bad habit, and I'm really working on this. I get in a bad habit of, like, isolating and siloing myself, but then also feeling like I'm complaining too much about where I kind of feel like I'm in, you know, the business. But I have to get in the better habit of, like, dude, if you really want to quote unquote make it, you have to do a better job of showing up for other people and just being in. You have to embrace the social element of what this is, because as you know, comedy can very much feel like adult high school. Like, that's how I describe it to civilians, as it were. It's like,
high school even sounds too mature.
High school,
for
that might even be disrespectful to high school, if we're going to be honest with you. So, and I don't know about you. I'm assuming you're probably similar. I had, like, an okay go of it. I wouldn't say it was, like, amazing. I wouldn't say it was terrible, but I also know it's something that I don't really want to revisit like that. So when you feel like that's kind of what has made me isolate myself, because you get the fear of being let down and, like, feeling like you know the outcome before it happens. And I've realized I just have to be like, dude, like, you have friends in this scene. You have friends in this business. You have friends that, like, know you're funny and are willing to push you out there, but you got to put yourself out there a little bit more if you want to get a little bit more out of this and serve the community of stand-up better. So that's what I'm really trying to work out now that I am kind of getting around that 10-year mark. I got my first special, you know, got some TV credits. I got some things happening, but I also feel like a little bit disillusioned from this particular scene. But I also have to, like, look in the mirror and be like, yeah, man, like, you have some valid feelings there, but, like, what is your participation in this, and why do you feel this way? And I've come to the conclusion that I just have to be someone who's just going to be out there, but in just more of a empathetic and appreciative way. And I think if you have more of that mentality, you can get kind of better stuff to sort, you know, to gravitate to you. It's not going to be the cure all, but I do think that can help if you're a comic that kind of feels like you're in that sort of rut.
Yeah, and it's, you know, so much of this is competitive, where we think that it's us versus each other, and we should move away from that and start more saying things like the rising tides raises all boats. Yes. What's good for your fellow comedians should, in theory, be good for you. You know, if somebody from your area gets a national deal of some sorts, well, in theory, they're going to come back to that area. They're going to look at other people in that area. You know, there's the whole sending the elevator back down too. If you're a champion of somebody, they're going to remember who helped lift them up to get to that top level. Now, don't do nice things for people just hoping that nice things will happen to you. It's like you do karma, you give out good karma to get back good karma. But you give out good karma because that's the right thing to do, not because you're like, well, it's going to come back to me. It's that weird, there's that weird selfish line where you're like, I'm doing things for others, so other good things happen for me. No, you're doing good for others because it's the point to do good, which is almost now they're starting to sound like a Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints commercial that's trying to get you do good for others. That's the way the Bible said.
You got an ad read. You got a mid-roll read for the Church of Scientology. What's going on here? Yeah, no, I mean, dude, like, I mean, that's a great point. Like, I've fallen into that trap a little bit, not necessarily completely expecting things out of others, although I think that's present for all comics. But like, I have a list of situations where I feel like I've done right by people, and quite frankly, they've just kind of like kept it moving. And you can sit there and you can overanalyze it, or you can say your heart was in the right place when you did those things, and you just have to kind of keep it moving to the stuff that you can control. And believe me, I can stew on that type of stuff for a long time. But again, it just kind of goes back to that previous point. It's just kind of like, we all have our own paths, and we're all running our own races. Like, we don't have to, like, it doesn't have to be this whole thing where it's like, this local comedian, they spurned me. It's like, nobody cares but the comics. That's the thing. Like, the audience doesn't give a shit. So like, why would I put any real energy into that when that's not going to have any effect on like who is actually caring about your stand-up that actually matters, which is people. It's not gatekeepers. It's not this guy who books this cool show at this club. It's like, find the people who are going to consume your art. That's music. It's what matters. Because if you find them, trust me when I tell you that Dennis and I both found out the hard way, which did not happen for us, is that when you find enough people, all of a sudden, some doors that might not have been opened are starting to crack and starting to open, because it's butts and seats, baby. We can be all precious with our art if we want to, but eventually, if you're trying to make this an occupation, it is butts in seats. And if you're starting to get there, then that's when the bigger things can start to happen without you having to feel like, I got to schmooze with this guy and I have to do this. It's like, people will come calling if you have enough of that behind you to be like, oh, this guy, like, clearly if I book this person in this town, 50 to 100 people are going to come out to see him. And like, that's what we're trying to get to. So I'm trying to keep that my focus. Like, how can I find an audience, and how can I serve that audience? And everything else will kind of, figure itself out, outside of generally not being a psycho, everything else will kind of fill in the gaps around that, hopefully. So
now, working as you do now with social media, has content creation as a comedian helped you figure your way around social media contact for brand, for brand to brand marketing? Or I guess it's for brand marketing and social media. Has being a comedian and having to navigate the world of social media helped you in that? Or has it been the other way around, that your social media as a comedian has improved because your day-to-day understanding is the tips and practices that are happening in the almighty algorithm of the social media monsters?
All hail the algorithm. No, I mean, as we speak, I'm getting blown up on Teams from my job. So I work in corporate social. I work for a huge brand that I'm not going to say, and they also don't know that I do stand up, and I would like to keep it that way, because separation of church and state, baby. We don't need that. We don't need to bring that to the table.
Which you don't have to deal with at the office. Like,
put this in one of your skits.
The funnies going.
Put this in one of your skits. Tell us a joke. How's comedy going? Cyanide capsule immediately. The worst thing. By the way, for the non-comics listening to this or watching this, stop doing. Don't do the following to comics. Don't ask a comic off the clock to tell you a joke. Don't try to give us material and then utter the words. Put that in one of your little skits. We're not doing this. Is not frigging Mad TV. We're not doing skits. What the hell is that? And then you might not think this is a microaggression toward comics, but it totally is, even though we're probably too much in our head about it. Stop sending us clips from other comics. We don't care. Please stop. If we find it funny, we'll find it. Like, oh man, found this Jeff Foxworthy clip. Save it. I don't want it in my DMs. I don't want to see that. Anyway, soapbox.
Trust me, we know how to curate our own algorithm for the things that we want to see. Don't need your help.
Comedy every night. We don't need to see this old George Carlin clip. We got it. We've seen it. We don't need it. Anyway, soapbox removed. But to your question, when I first started this gig, I thought that my comedy would be able to somehow kind of shape this sort of job. And while I have the opportunity to be funny, I quickly hit a corporate wall, like bam, really hard. Not in like a blood splattering way, but enough to have a couple cuts on the face. I'm like, oh, that was stupid. I'll learn from that, I guess. And now it's definitely been the other way around. So like with the company I work for, we understandably have several sort of laser beams that we have to drop around because of like the industry that we're in and the type of brand that we are. And it's made me have to be a lot more creative with a smaller context, because now I know, well, I can't completely show off my sense of humor in that way. They're never going to, the content I make has to literally go through like 6 levels of approvals. Like it's that type of thing. So I know that the big boss is not going to go for this. So what can I do that's kind of the brand's tone of voice and feeling like I have my creative imprint on this, but also understanding the objectives of this brand. Because look, let's be honest. The brand, it's to get people to buy things and keep our stock price going up. That is our ultimate overarching objective. So how that's related to my comedy is that's kind of made me kind of look at things a bit more, I don't know if you want to use the word granular or dialed in, to be like, how can I better play these algorithm games? Like still being true to me as a kind of comedy. Like I'm not a crowd work guy, no disrespect to crowd work guys, but like that's just not really the way I'm going to approach putting clips out there. I'm not opposed to it. It's just like not what I'm seeking out. Like right now I'm literally just pushing clips and cutting and captioning and doing all the stupid tricks that you do from all stuff from my special. So my whole feed is just all like my whole feed, like it could even on Instagram, it could be a 5-second thing with just a quick punch from one of my jokes in my special. But because now I'm working with the brand, and you kind of see behind the curtain about like how people in the comments will respond, and just getting a better understanding of like what's going to perform better versus what's not. That's kind of how it started to kind of influence like my social strategy for my own comedy content. Yeah, maybe I'm not like crazy about like every stupid kind of like hook that you need to do, but now I can know enough about it to like appreciate why I'm doing it and why it's actually going to work. I don't feel like I'm being disingenuous with like any sort of content I'm putting out, but I do know that like just because I wanted to put out the longer clip, it might not get any views. But you know what? If I put out a 5 or 10 second clip of this, or I find like something really specific and I can hashtag it right, it might get a lot of views and engagement. And that's the game that we have to play if we want to reach more people. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to get people to our shows. We're trying to get people to our special. And you have to be willing to play that game. You just need to find your way to do it so you can actually like get some enjoyment out of it. Because if you don't like it, you're not going to stick with it, and it's not going to resonate to people that you're trying to reach. And that's just kind of like simple things that I've like taken from this gig to be like, okay, some of this can be soul crushing, but you gotta figure out the way where you can surf that soul crushing wave to the best that makes you feel good about it, I guess is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, the thing I hate hearing so much when you talk about social media to somebody, and comedians do it too, especially, older ones, but I've had friends my own age say things like this, like, oh, I don't want to be on Twitter because I don't need to tell everyone every time I take a shit. Oh, I don't want to get on Instagram and have to take pictures of all my food. Oh, I don't want to get on TikTok and do dances. Then don't.
Right.
You can put whatever content on these platforms that you want. You don't have to do the things that are trending. You don't have to do things that you think are silly and stupid. I don't like doing front-facing videos and talking, so I don't. None of that. I have one video of that on my TikTok, and it's because I really wanted to talk about how much I hated hearing dudes dissing on women at the open mics when I was out of town. It's like, this is how bad your shitty misogyny is. You're making me front face on TikTok.
Right.
You're making me front face on TikTok.
You're making me flip the camera because that's how much I despise this content. Yeah, totally. I mean, I've had not too many, but maybe it's sometimes you run into it. Usually it's like with older comics who maybe are just kind of sick of adding new social media and that sort of thing. Like for me personally, I realized after a certain amount of time that I just was not going to be the comic that blows up off of Twitter. And as much as that kind of like hurt my ego, where it's like, I'm a good writer, but it's just like, I don't know what it was. I just never connected on Twitter. And ever since, the Dark Sith Lord down in Austin, Texas purchased it, I was like, well, this app is kind of sucks anyway. And now this guy owns it and now it's X. So I just made the executive decision to delete my Twitter. And it's fine. It's had no impact on my life or career. And on the flip side of that, to what you're just talking about, like, either do it or you don't, I figured out that I can do well on YouTube Shorts and I can do well on TikTok and kind of on Instagram. But you have to be able to find whatever that thing is to get yourself out there and make it enjoyable for you to do content. So, like, you either do it or you don't, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything. Like, I hate Threads. Like, I think Threads is trash, but I do I don't really think there's a great strategy for it, and I just think it just kind of became another Twitter echo chamber. It's just Twitter that's not owned. It's now owned by Zuckerberg instead of Elon. So now it's just kind of like, okay, been on Threads, I'm on Threads, kind of getting a similar sensation to what I felt on Twitter. Probably not going to commit too hard on Threads, and I don't feel any guilt about that because I found the places that have worked for what I want to do and any kind of like strategy that I want to implement. So everybody just has to find their own version of that.
Yeah, and so much of the social media is just randomness.
Right.
Like the thing where people are like, "Oh, this is what worked for me," and thinking it'll work for everybody is not true.
As someone who actually gets paid a borderline ridiculous amount to literally be a TikTok man, I call myself, when people ask me what I do for work, I'm like, I'm the TikTok man for this major brand. And there is, you can't force viral. You can't. Like, you can't pay for it, and you can't copy someone's method to a T to guarantee that you are going to get it. Viral just happens when it's the right confluence of the right type of content and audio and ridiculously attractive person on the front-facing camera, and that includes present company. And when you do the right confluence of things that work for you, as someone who's went quasi-viral a couple times, like not anything crazy, but you also, it's very similar to stand-up. You have to kind of find the things that like really hit for you on stage, maybe if not even your favorite things about performing, that are going to be the things that you can kind of replicate and do that again and again with your actual jokes. At the end of the day, you have to do something of that nature to bring in the audience and earn their trust. And whether it's a live performance or on somebody swiping on their toilet on TikTok, you have to find that thing about yourself that's going to grab them and connect. And it can't just be like, well, this social media guru told me this, so it's going to work for me. That's not how this works. I'm telling you, it's not. And you're going to be sorely disappointed when you're stuck in the 200 view zone talking about, oh, well, I posted at midnight in Malaysia, and I used the FYP hashtag 150 times like they said, and the video was only 7.5 seconds, and I slid into the camera like Kramer from Seinfeld, and it was all the things that they said were going to work. And it's like, dude, it's not how that works. You have to find your own.
Yeah, it's so much anecdotal.
Yes. Nobody has the answer.
And
they don't.
I've made it my personal life mission to try to expose so many social media gurus, because I don't understand how no one else sees this as a instant fatal flaw. Is that, show me a so-called social media guru that has a lot of followers. They don't exist.
Yeah.
If they're trying to sell you, and I use the word sell because none of them are giving it away for free. If they're trying to sell you on you becoming a social media success, and they are also not a success, how can you trust them?
Yeah. It's very curious that all those guys always have like 5,000 followers on the nose, which, look, it's more followers than I have, but I'll tell you what, I also have very close friends that are well past 1 million, and they're not selling any courses. And we now live in a society where people do things once and then they sell a course. And it's like, okay, No, I'm not paying you $3.99.99 to pay to. I'm not paying you for something that you literally just put in a Chat GPT prompt to gather all the information, and then you copied and pasted it, and you repackaged it in your coaching course. Like that's the world that we live in now. Everybody does something one time, and now they're an expert, and now they're going to one-on-one mentor you. Like, get out of here. I'm not doing that.
Well, we can say everyone's doing that except for Haktua Girl. She's not right now selling people on how to spin on that thing.
On Haktua techniques. Although I'm sure she's been offered.
She might be the guru of that.
Yeah, I mean, she clearly had the adjective down pat. So God bless her. I mean, and that's another thing. It's like, I know that I think she wants to start doing stand up, and she has a podcast.
I don't think she wants to do. I think it's the people around her influence her.
They're like, you're a funny person. You should do stand up. Yeah, totally. It kind of reeks of that for sure.
I guess I got to.
Right. And look, she's a funny person. She's kind of like the silly, like kind of country girl. But it's like that's another thing too. Like kind of going back where we were talking about a few minutes ago. It's like, dude, like. Some people just really catch these sort of like weird, like lightning in a bottle moments, and it's like you gotta let them have their thing because it's not gonna have any effect on your career and like what you can do in your career. So like if she wants to be Haktua, spit on that thing, and now she's selling out the Irvine Improv, then God bless her. She still has to go up there and crush. So trust me. I'm sure as you do too. I have a ton of stories in my travel, especially from other veteran comics who have been the opening act for the social media sensation that booked the big comedy club, and they're booked for an hour, and they don't even have 3 minutes of jokes. So, life comes at you fast, people. Don't be envious of these people who blow up because they might not have put in the time to be as good at this craft as you are. And, it's like any other, it's like I'm not, I can hit a couple baskets. I'm not going to go out there and guard LeBron James. It's not going to happen. So we all going to have to figure that out.
I haven't had a lot of these, but I've had at least in the past, I'll say month, maybe 2 months. Little kids who come on my day job is I'm a comedic historic tour guide of Boston, and we have kids and they come up to the vehicle and you ask them, setting up crowd work jokes where it's like, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I've had 2 or 3 kids this season say, I want to be a social media or I want to be a YouTube star. And it's just like, well, I have no comments to that. I'm not allowed to reply to that statement because what I'm going to say is soul crushing and demeaning. And I'm not allowed to do that in public anymore.
Right. You have to be like, good for you, and give them a pat on the head and a sticker. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But so as someone who's worked behind the scenes in content creation, as someone who has worked in tech, filming your special, did you have difficulties letting go of control and trusting in the people that you put into positions to run cameras, run sound, and have faith in their abilities and not be able to be in your own head, worried about somebody forgetting to hit a record button because they are professionals and we professionals make a mistake.
That's how you got the nickname of Deadair. Ba-boom. No, surprisingly, that was not an issue at all. I had a great creative partner. One of my best friends I grew up with, Matt Everett, was the director of it, and he was a great creative partner and equally enthusiastic about doing it. And I was really able to kind of let the reins go for that end. I mean, to be honest with you, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be like, look, man, like this is my first thing. We have one show and we have one night to get this right. I did not, as you know, being in the business, most comics, little inside baseball for the non-comedians out there, most of your favorite Netflix and HBO Max and Pornhub comics, wherever the hell you watch your people, they tour their hour or half hour, whatever they got. They're touring that for like a couple years, and by the time that they're shooting it over the course of usually like 2 to 4 shows. As someone without a fan base, I had to use the tools that I had to get this thing ready, and then I was fortunate enough when I recorded this in my hometown to sell out a small theater, and I got in the local news and had some good write-ups, and I got a really good groundswell of support for people to be there. But at the same time, it was like I had the one opportunity to do this. So if this went horribly, I would have had to go back to the drawing board. I wouldn't have had another shot to really do it in that way. So I was grateful for Matt to be able to like take the reins and help me get some camera ops, and we rented gear together and making sure the lights and sound were on point. People hit record and they had the light cues at the right time and this sort of deal. So no, dude, I was pumped that I had the help, and I could just focus on being a performer. And to be honest with you, there was essentially nothing I would change. It went shockingly well. There were no technical hangups. There were not like, I wish I would have got that. There's nothing that like burns in my craw at night when I'm laying awake at 2 a.m. like, damn it, I wish we would have got this angle or kept this part of the edit in. There's like essentially none of that, which is friggin' fantastic, because as you know, there's a million things you could psychoanalyze and go wrong, and I don't have that sensation, and I was convinced that I would. I was like, I'm gonna drive myself crazy with this whole process, and that wasn't that, and it was just a testament to being able to, like you said, delegate a little bit, let the reins go, and just trust other people to do their part of the process, and just let me be the comic, and we'll kill it, and that's really what happened. So that was great.
Speaking on that, since we have brought up the special, I'm gonna welcome you to the same club that I am in, and the same club that Laurie Kilmartin is in. And when I welcomed her to it, she was like, "This club sucks, and I don't want to be in." And it's the Dead Parents Club.
Yeah, let's go. Yes.
Which your special is about the unfortunate passing of your mother. I'm sorry to hear. I lost my father a couple years ago, and that was my move from Baltimore was Boston. Was literally the day my father died. My father died on Christmas. I found out the night, he died in the middle of the night between Christmas and the 26th. And the next morning I get the call from the family. And as I'm rushing home from my job, my part-time job working at Best Buy selling cell phones, because working in the radio industry and being a comedian does not pay your bills, even though you have 3 roommates.
Blue polo? We're doing blue polo?
Yep.
Khakis?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Lord of mercy.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, we had black pants because we were the cell phone department.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. No, yeah, we had these slightly different uniform, but as I'm rushing home, I get the email from the person who would become my boss of my new job here in Boston, going, "Hey, give me a call when you have a chance. Really want to bring you up here to Boston to work at this radio station." And I'm like, I don't have time to deal with that. But the reason why I can make that decision is I finally, my father passed. I can finally go, I don't need to be here for him anymore. He's gone. I can move on. I have not written a special about my dead dad. In fact, it wasn't, I did a year later, I finally did jokes about his passing at an open mic, which was rough for me at the time. And, I'm not particularly, my father and I, we have a fine enough relationship. I'm not, his passing is not weighing on me or anything like that. But for you, I watched the special. I heard the things that you say about your mom. You clearly loved your mother. This was clearly a movement and an experience for you. How long was it? The old cliche is, tragedy plus time equals comedy. I've had things in my life where I can instantly talk about it on stage, and get through it. And there's things where it's taken me years to get by it. There's things that I could probably mine jokes from that happened in my life that I'm still not over. And it's been 6-7 years past, because every time I think about that incident, it still brings up rage. So for you to write this entire special about the passing of your mother, was this cathartic and helped you grieve, or did you have to get through the grieving process before you could even start writing?
Yeah. My situation was unique, and, I'm, of course, sorry to hear about your dad, especially like happening at that time. We all, it's coming for everybody. So it's just, we all have to kind of rationalize it in our own way. And for me, it was a bit different.
Wait, death is coming for everyone but us, right?
Yeah,
we're gonna live forever, right, dude?
You're dead air, so you're already hovering above us in the static, baby. So I don't know. We'll see what kind of frozen Ted Williams technology is coming for us. But in the meantime,
heads in jars.
Heads in jars. Shout out to The Simpsons. Other than that, while we're still earthly beings, my experience was different because I, as you saw and I chronicled, I grew up with a disabled parent, And so I always just kind of knew that like I had a parent that wasn't the same as the other kids, and that was like, like visibly declining as the years went on. She dealt with cancer a few different times. And so like me kind of like being prepared for death and grief came in a different way because it was just kind of like normalized. Like I didn't really have to, it wasn't like, oh my God, my mom died. It's like, no, mom was dying for a minute now. She was just still alive while she was doing it. So it was a different sort of deal. So, writing it, yes, there was certainly a catharsis with doing that. But I also just kind of like looked at it more as like in a couple different ways. One part is the personal side of it, and I was like, well, what's interesting about my story? What are those things that I can share that kind of really sort of give people that inside sort of look about like what shapes how I look at things? What shapes my sense of humor? Like what are those kind of things that kind of go into that mix? And then I also looked at it from a comic side where it's like, okay, I could talk about dating apps or Spirit Airlines or asking two people in the front row who are clearly siblings if they're having sex. If I don't want to do that, what is something that I can do to, quite frankly, just do my best to kind of stand out from the pack? There's a million funny people out there. There's no shortage of funny, but there is a shortage of interesting. And I wanted to say, yes, funny has to be paramount. It's got to be first. But equally as important is what is interesting about this, and how am I going to attach people to this narrative, to these characters that I've introduced, this whole kind of through line, and how I'm connected to my mom and all that sort of thing. So that was like really important for me to kind of illustrate, because like I just knew that like with the timing and coming out of COVID and everything, it's like I felt ready to do something. And I've always been kind of the person that like because like I said, it's kind of more normalized for me. I've always been able to kind of like easily joke about stuff like that, even to my own detriment, or being, punished as a youth by teachers and parents and so forth. But that was kind of one of my early signals about how I could be a comedian. I could take the quote unquote tragedy and I can make a bit out of it. And I could joke and get people to laugh about it, because like that was easier for me than just like crying or talking about it. I put that in the scope of like, how can I find a bit or a joke out of this? And this is just kind of like a grander manifestation of something that I've always been doing my entire life. So I think that was kind of like the ingredients that sort of went into, making this whole thing.
All right. Well, where can everybody see Live from Your Mother's Funeral?
It's the easiest place, the good old World Wide Web, bennyblueeyes.net or .com. I'm the proud owner of both domains, I might add.
Oh, you're spending $9.99 on
GoDaddy. GoDaddy, no, not a sponsor of this show. Getting a lot of money out of yours truly, so free plug. So that's the best place. It's also, if you search it, it's on YouTube, my YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and then social-wise, Instagram at Benny Blue Eyes, TikTok, it's Benny Blue, Facebook, Benny Blue Comedy. So yeah, but if you type in Benny Blue, Live from My Mother's Funeral, if you get any sort of spam pop-ups for gas station erection pills, X out of those, and then you'll find my special. I'm also not trying to sell you any sort of casket or urn combination. So don't fall for those things either.
And the real question is also, is that the real urn?
It's not. I wish it was. I know, breaking people's hearts. It would have been friggin' fan. The questions I've been asked is like, was my mom actually alive and you just roasted her to her face, or is that the real urn? Not real urn. Nice $30 purchase off of Amazon. But it really should.
I mean, we don't need that level of authenticity. Right. You could put a fake one on stage.
No, we could. I mean, what if I just kind of like macabre Gallagher'd this thing, and I just like I spread the ashes on
just
on the splash zone in the
spray everybody.
Yeah. Get your tarps. Here comes mommy. Yep. I really should.
Yeah. For my dad's urn, he used to collect soda bottles and like fancy containers and decanters and stuff. And when they quoted us the price for the urn, I leaned over to my mom and went, why don't we just get one of his old bottles? Like, my dad is basically, his ashes have been entombed in a 6-pack of old 7-Up bottles. So Betty, it was great having you on the program. Your special is absolutely great. I really hope people do go watch and see it. It's not just funny, but it's full of ton of heart. And you're right. Funny is easy. Interesting is hard. And you accomplished the hard by making this special both funny and interesting. And I'm really glad that we got to have this conversation today. And I hope that people enjoyed learning more about you before they go see your special live from my mother's funeral.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it. And I hope you are true to your authentic self and you keep all of your mistakes in this episode in the edit, just so people know that they're getting the real deal, especially the scream. When I listen back to this, I just want to hear the scream at the top, and then I'm golden.
The last part of this conversation is just gonna be you clipped out of all those things.
The algorithm, baby. The algorithm. Let's go.